Good evening and welcome to the special election 2016 post-debate edition of Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. Tonight we'll discuss the third and final debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, a debate that, like the other two, had its fireworks.
There's only one of us on this stage who's actually shipped jobs to Mexico, because that's Donald. He's shipped jobs to 12 countries, including Mexico. But he mentioned China. And, you know, one of the biggest problems we have with China is the illegal dumping of steel and aluminum into our markets. I have fought against that as a senator. I've stood up against it as Secretary of State. Donald has bought Chinese steel and aluminum. In fact, the Trump hotel right here in Las Vegas was made with Chinese steel. So he goes around with crocodile tears about how terrible it is, but he has given jobs to Chinese steel workers, not American steel workers.
Mr. Trump? Go ahead,
I ask a simple question. She's been doing this for 30 years. Why the hell didn't you do it over the last 15, 20 years? You were very much involved. Excuse me, my turn. You were very much involved in every aspect of this country, very much. And you do have experience. I'd say the one thing you have over me is experience, but it's bad experience because what you've done has turned out badly. For 30 years, you've been in a position to help. And if you say that I use steel or I use something else, I make it impossible for me to do that. I wouldn't mind. The problem is you talk, but you don't get anything done, Hillary.
All right, let's start tonight by talking about the foreign affairs stances of the two candidates and what we heard tonight. Joining us are Philip Jones, Dean of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and a former CIA analyst, and Daniel Rothenberg, co-director of ASU's Center on the Future of War. Good to have you both here. Thanks for joining us. What did you hear tonight as far as foreign affairs were concerned?
I thought we heard more this time than we've heard before. I'm not sure there was anything greatly different. Donald Trump is very good at accusing the Obama administration and Hillary Clinton for what has happened in places like Iraq and Syria. I'm not hearing from him any detailed response about what he would do. I think Mrs. Clinton did a better job of really coming up with some ideas about how to deal with the problems in Syria.
You mentioned, kind of referred to this, one of his quotes tonight was, she, Hillary Clinton, gave us ISIS. What are your thoughts when you hear that?
I think it's a very simplistic interpretation of what's happened. The Muslim world is not a place that can be interpreted that easily. When the United States got out of Iraq, we were sort of urged out of Iraq by the then government in Baghdad, the Shia government in Baghdad, and the idea of creating a kind of state of Islam, a caliphate, is something that I think took the Muslim world by storm. I think it was something that attracted a lot of younger people, but I don't think it was caused by the United States.
What did you hear tonight?
Well, I agree with a lot of that perspective. I mean, one thing that you hear a lot from Donald Trump, and I think to some degree this was a debate where Donald Trump was the focus. We all wanted to see how he'd perform. Would he be unreasonable? Would he engage in accusations and the like? So he kept his calm, that I think everybody noticed, although he is the sort of candidate and possibly the sort of person who on foreign policy issues sees things as a sort of black and white yes or no situation. And clearly that is a misread of the world.
So when he says that, another quote, we're being outplayed by Russia and we're being outplayed by Assad, does that ring true to a certain extent? What do you think when you hear that?
Well, it's very difficult to assess Syria and who is playing whom and how this will end up. I mean, it's not clear at all when Russia came in with a military force to support the Assad regime that may turn out to be a devastatingly terrible decision for Russia. It's a little early in the game. Had they supported the Assad regime? Yes. Although his take, for example, on the fall of Aleppo precisely has not fallen.
Right.
And what we're faced with now is a devastating humanitarian crisis where clearly the only way to move through this, if there's any way at all, is one that involves a great deal of nuance and sophistication.
We're talking about the Syrian civil war. We have another moment from tonight's debate, a couple of moments actually, regarding the Syrian civil war. Let's take a listen.
But I think we can take back Mosul, and then we can move on into Syria and take back Raqqa. this is what we have to do. I'm just amazed that he seems to think that the Iraqi government and our allies and everybody else launched the attack on Mosul to help me in this election. But that's how Donald thinks.
Aleppo is a disaster. It's a humanitarian nightmare, but it has fallen from any standpoint. I mean, what do you need, a signed document? Take a look at Aleppo. It is so sad when you see what's happened. And a lot of this is because of Hillary Clinton, because what's happened is by fighting Assad, who turned out to be a lot tougher than she thought, and now she's going to say, oh, he loves Assad. He's just much tougher and much smarter than her and Obama. We're backing rebels. We don't know who the rebels are. We're giving them lots of money, lots of everything. We don't know who the rebels are. And when and if, and it's not going to happen because you have Russia and you have Iran now, but if they ever did overthrow Assad, you might end up with as bad as Assad is, and he's a bad guy, but you may very well end up with worse than Assad.
We've had millions of people leave Syria, and those millions of people inside Syria who've been dislocated. So I think we could strike a deal and make it very clear to the Russians and the Syrians that this was something that we believe was in the best interests of the people on the ground in Syria. It would help us with our fight against ISIS.
What are you hearing when you hear that?
What I'm hearing is an argument over a very contemporary issue. And I'm not hearing in a lot of these debates the longer term strategic issues that are very, very important and that I think the next president is going to have to deal with. And they really center on Russia. Obviously, China is another issue, but I think we do face antagonist in the Kremlin who's a strategic thinker. He's a geopolitical thinker, and whereas I don't think that Syria is governable anymore. I don't think Assad, even should he win, and should he win, it would be with Russian help. I don't think that the country is governable. I think there would have to be something beyond the violence. But what really concerns me is the position that Russia is gaining in the Mediterranean. And the other thing that I think really concerns me is the beginning of Putin's effort to reconstruct a sphere of influence in Europe, and a kind of concern that maybe NATO has gotten itself into a dilemma, a future dilemma that could create a world crisis. And I think the coming president is going to have to probably deal with the beginnings of that.
Yes, and Donald Trump says that he's a better negotiator. He is the better negotiator to deal with Russia. Does that ring true? Does that make sense? I mean, do you have to be a better negotiator? Is there more to it than that? I mean, talk to us about this.
Well, one of the problems with a presidential campaign as a way to understand these sort of issues is the suggestion that these individual people on their own, based on who they are, will direct world affairs. Yeah. And in fact, there's many interests, there's many complicated factors in what's going on. And perhaps the biggest negative takeaway is this sense that the world could be decided with a winner and a loser based on something relatively simple. If only X, then Y would happen. Surely the post 9/11 world should have taught us how complex things are, how difficult it is to project US power in a way that yields certain outcomes. And it would be nice if we could have a higher level discussion of strategy. I'm fairly certain that the issue of a negotiator at the table is not what's going on in these complex global conflicts.
So when Donald Trump says that the Iran nuclear deal, stupidest deal ever, he repeated that claim tonight, and will absolutely, absolutely lead to Iran getting nuclear weapons. You say?
Well, we know that Iran was quite close to getting nuclear weapons before the deal. It's too early, quite frankly, to assess whether the deal will be successful. Its goal is to delay the capacity of Iran to develop nuclear weapons. And I think, quite frankly, we can't assess its success or failure right now.
You mentioned long-term issues don't seem to be addressed here. Did you hear anything tonight that made you think, all right, he or she gets it, or I can expect something positive in the future from him or from her?
I think Hillary Clinton has the experience. I think she does get it. She understands the way the world works. She was in the room when they got bin Laden. I mean, she knows that. She was Secretary of State. I really trust her more in the area of foreign policy than I would Donald Trump. But I do think these longer-term issues are out there, and I'm not really sure how she would deal with them. She's been a little bit tougher than Obama on some of these issues when she was Secretary of State, and I would see that as sort of a maybe part of her foreign policy. Be a little bit more confrontational.
The one thing you didn't hear tonight that you wish you would have heard?
I think I would have liked to hear on foreign policy some positive vision that recognizes that the world is not just a place of conflict and disaster. There are in fact many positive trends in the world. The United States contributes productively to many of these, is a barrier to others. But this sense of disaster and looming threat that's dominating our political understanding of the world, I think is very dangerous, and I think it's incorrect.
Do you think it's how so quickly? Why is it incorrect?
Well, it's incorrect because there's an over amount of focus on a handful of issues. So we see, this is a long conversation, but we see, for example, all kinds of positive changes in people's access to healthcare, people's access to education, all over the world. There are trends that are enormously positive, and I think it's not productive to look at the world only in terms of the U.S. The U.S. isn't the arbiter of what happens in the world. The U.S. is a significant player. So we could look at all kinds of things that are going on, and it's more appropriate and more productive to integrate the U.S. within a complex world than to assume that we determine what happens.
Agree with that?
I agree with that.
All right. That's a good enough answer for this. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and very interesting stuff. We'll take a pause here and take another look at another moment in tonight's debate.
What I am also arguing is that bringing undocumented immigrants out from the shadows, putting them into the formal economy will be good, because then employers can't exploit them and undercut Americans' wages. And Donald knows a lot about this. He used undocumented labor to build the Trump Tower. He underpaid undocumented workers, and when they complained, he basically said what a lot of employers do: you complain, I'll get you deported. I want to get everybody out of the shadows, get the economy working, and not let employers like Donald exploit undocumented workers, which hurts them but also hurts American workers.
Mr. Trump.
President Obama has moved millions of people out. Nobody knows about it. Nobody talks about it. But under Obama, millions of people have been moved out of this country. They've been deported. She doesn't want to say that, but that's what's happened, and that's what's happened big league. As far as moving these people out and moving, we either have a country or we don't. We're a country of laws. We either have a border or we don't. Now, you can come back in and you can become a citizen, but it's very unfair. We have millions of people that did it the right way. They're online, they're waiting. We're going to speed up the process, big league, because it's very inefficient. But they're online and they're waiting to become citizens. Very unfair that somebody runs across the border, becomes a citizen. Under her plan, you have open borders. You would have a disaster on trade, and you will have a disaster with your open borders.
For better or worse, the world is watching our 2016 election campaign, and tonight we hear from three people studying at ASU's Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication Humphrey Fellows Program for foreign journalists. Jean-Claude Kabangera is the chief news editor for Radio TV 10 in Rwanda. Dina Janzagamova of Kazakhstan is part of the BBC World Service's Kazakh section in London, and Ivailo Vezenkov has worked as television reporter, producer, and presenter at Bulgaria's largest private television channel. It's good to have you all here. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the show. What were your thoughts about the debate tonight?
Oh my goodness, this is the most interesting debate I've ever watched in my life. This is even a very interesting race as far as I'm concerned. I've been watching this since I was back home in my country, the last presidential debates that happened in recent years between President Obama, Mitt Romney. But this was very interesting. Donald Trump was more serious comparing to the other the recent debates, the first one, the second one, and Hillary Clinton was more focused, more than him. And I was very, shocked to hear someone who is running for presidency calling a woman a running mate, a nasty woman.
Yes.
With the respect of women. That's another view for the future.
That's interesting you bring that up, because like in your country, that's just something not done? That's considered bad form?
Actually, Rwandans do value respect, no matter what, if you're a politician or just a normal citizen. And for just hearing that kind of word, it's like an insult. You can't hear anybody just insulting another one, just like a high-ranking official like that.
Yeah. What did you think of tonight's debate?
Well, tonight's debate was more calm, I think, than it was the last time, than the second one. So the foreign policy focus was very, very interesting. And as far as my country is concerned, and I come from the post-Soviet bloc,
Yes.
if you like, so I'm from the backyards of Russia. And Russia was touched upon so many times today. And it was interesting to me just to observe how Russia is, well, it has become sort of, so it's presented as an evil sort of superpower here in the United States. But these debates, you know, have, I think the degree of that have grown. So it's taken it to a next level. So I think there's going to be a lot of concern over, you know, in my part of the world in regard to that.
I would imagine in Bulgaria, also Iron Curtain country, every time Russia's brought up, ears pay attention, don't you?
We have almost the same discussions in Bulgaria right now at this very moment, because we have elections 2 days before the American elections, which means that we hear the same discussions, the same discourse is going on right now. This debate was really, really interesting. It started smoothly, but then it turned into a fight again. And some people are surprised, some people are not. And we tend to look at these debates as a show sometimes, but we forget that this show is transitory and the election will be over in less than a month, and we're gonna wake up, and then we're gonna have to face the real issues.
What are you hearing from folks in Bulgaria regarding this election?
Like several hours ago, I decided to check the social media. Even during the debates, while we were watching, I saw the most popular video. It went viral. Like these are people who are destroying their TVs at home, being mad. Like Americans are destroying their TVs. So that's telling me something. There is this is a symptom of something. And also, I noticed that there is a recent survey that shows that 89% of Europeans don't believe in Trump's ability to do the right thing with the foreign affairs. Like something that I didn't hear, or at least I didn't hear enough details, was about the foreign policy. Like the Middle East is being mentioned, but it's like something imaginary. Like I don't hear concrete decisions or something like policies.
What are you hearing from folks back in Rwanda regarding this election?
Actually, what's been out there, and a lot of people have been, you know, calling me, especially the colleagues we're working together, like, actually they're most interested in the foreign relations the United States have with the other current countries outside. So it's like, regarding the Trump side, people are just saying that he doesn't have real facts about what's going to happen. He doesn't have just real policies that will just like support his ideas and put in place to keep those allies, as Hillary Clinton is trying to say. So the folks back there in Africa, for example, just in Rwanda, they're very curious to see the outcome or the results of these foreign affairs of the United States, like their relations with the rest of the world.
Yeah, Kazakhstan, folks back there, what are you hearing? Are there questions? Are there confusion? What are you hearing?
Exactly. I mean, the number one question is how did it happen that sort of a pop culture icon, Mr. Trump, got so much far in the country like the United States? That's number one question. The number two is how the U.S. elections gonna affect the U.S. and Russian affairs, which are in a very heated and crisis situation at the moment. So everyone is really, really polarized, just as in the U.S. I think all across kind of the post-Soviet bloc, post-Soviet area, everyone is really polarized over this race in terms of the politics.
Compare, we're running out of time here, but compare elections in Kazakhstan to what you're seeing here. Election campaigns, I should say.
Oh, it's an absolutely different pictures that you have. We don't have political debate as this back in Kazakhstan. We, I mean, there is some opposition to the current government, but it's very much under radar. What we experience here is absolutely different picture.
Isn't that interesting? Real quickly, compare what you're seeing here with what happens back in Bulgaria.
I'll try to be as fast and short as possible. It's like a deja vu. I mean, I've seen these debates and the same discussions back in Bulgaria, especially today. Only the faces are different, but the rhetorics are the same.
So they call each other.
They're nasty. They're nasty.
They are really. So a nasty woman doesn't necessarily raise your eyebrows at all, huh? You hear that all the time back.
I hear even worse.
Isn't that it?
Yeah.
Rwanda. Compare elections there. The campaign, the dialogue, the mood.
Actually, people are now involved in voting, and the system is pretty different. It's a democratic country, of course, but we do not have political debate. So each candidate is running on his own and conducting his campaign on his own, and the president is voted by the majority, the plurality. So it's totally different, and they do have respect. They do not engage in personal affairs rather than the state's really concerns.
Yeah, we usually see that here as well, but things change, and it's good to have you all here. Very interesting perspectives. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Get the inside scoop on what's happening at Arizona PBS. Become an insider. You'll receive weekly updates on the most anticipated upcoming programs and events. Get the insider delivered to your email inbox. Visit azpbs.org to sign up today.
Finally tonight, let's get some general impressions of this evening's debate from KTAR News senior reporter Jim Cross, who joins us via satellite outside the Thomas and Mack Center at the University of Las Vegas, University of Nevada, UNLV, Jim. It's UNLV. Let's get it right there. Describe the atmosphere, Jim. What are you seeing back? What are you seeing there?
Well, it was a big crowd in and around Thomas and Mack Center all day here into the night. We were in the Spin Alley in the Media Center inside of the Cox Pavilion outside of Thomas and Mack Center. Several moments during this debate, there were a lot of oohs and ahs when either candidate said something. Probably, I guess the most lighthearted spot of the evening is when Hillary pointed out that Donald Trump felt that when he didn't get an award for Celebrity Apprentice, it was rigged, and he said, "I should have won." That was one of the lighter moments of the night. The rest of it was fairly chippy as we watched in the Media Center.
As far as the oohs and the ahs, who had more oohs and who had more ahs?
I think he probably had more oohs and ahs. The comment he made about hombres would be one. Several shots he took at her about the emails about, Benghazi, Iraq, and so on and so forth. I think he probably won that battle of the night as far as getting reaction from thousands of reporters that were in that room.
As far as Donald Trump, I think two things kind of stuck, at least here. First of all, when he didn't say that he would accept necessarily the results of the election. What kind of response did that get there?
That drew almost a reaction of, there were some oohs, but it was almost a shocked reaction because, there had been rumors about that, people hinting around about that, and he flat out came out and said, not necessarily. And I think that really stunned a lot of people that were watching around the world tonight and a fair amount of reporters too.
And another moment was when he kind of interrupted Hillary Clinton and said, she's just a nasty woman. She's just a nasty woman. I mean, we talked about that around here on the table here tonight. That seemed like it might get a response there as well?
When he called her a nasty woman?
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a lot of times during this debate tonight. It was very loud in the Media Center. We had great television access to this debate. It's such a reaction. It had some light moments, but those were few and far between. you could tell these two people deeply dislike each other. And there's nothing, insincere about that dislike. They genuinely just don't like each other beyond the fact they're in a presidential race. And it came out very clearly tonight in their words, in their body action, and everything else on stage.
Yeah, we didn't see any handshakes afterwards. Did you get the impression?
No.
This is the third debate now. Did you get the impression that a little bit of debate fatigue has set in and we've pretty much heard all we're going to hear?
Ted, I'm going to have you repeat that. We got an airport just to our south, and of course the plane flies right over.
All right. The idea of we had 3 debates so far, and I know for some folks debate fatigue set in after the first debate, but we're on the third one right now. Are folks did they think they're going to get, did anyone, the feeling that you're going to get something new, did people expect that tonight? Or, again, or fatigue setting in?
I think people expected Donald Trump to come, thundering away, maybe more than he has in the previous debates, and that's, subjective, whether that occurred tonight or not. I don't think either candidate has anything new right now that will come out to shock anybody. I think their supporters on both sides are firmly in their camp. I see right now there's a couple of things at play. One is there's about 15%, maybe even 18% of people who are undecided. Gary Johnson, Jill Stein, write-in candidates. That is a large amount of people who are undecided at this point in an election. Again, Trump's base firm, Hillary Clinton's base firm, a lot of undecideds, and you have millions of independents out there right now who are on the fence, and these debates are trying to swing them one way or the other, and right now it's hard to get a read on which way the independents are going to go on this.
All right. Jim, good work. Good to see you again. Jim Cross, KTAR News, live there at Thomas and Mack Arena at University of Nevada at Las Vegas. Thanks, Jim. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Ted. Always a pleasure.
And that is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you for joining us on this special post-debate edition of Arizona Horizon. And a reminder, please join us for results and analysis after the general election, November 8th. You have a great evening.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.